Prove you're not dreaming right now. I don't mean as a fun thought experiment you can wave off in 5 seconds. Actually try it. Find one thing, one solid, undeniable thing that tells you this moment is real and not something your sleeping brain cooked up. Take a second. I'll wait. You probably reach for something like, "This feels too detailed to be a dream." Or, "I remember what I did this morning, and dreams don't have that kind of continuity." Or, "I can read this text clearly, and dream text is supposed to come out garbled." All three are wrong, not slightly off, wrong in a way that's been demonstrated philosophically and more recently in a lab. That's what this video is actually about. A man named René Descartes asked himself this exact question back in 1641, alone in a room, hunting for one single feature of experience that could never show up in a dream. He didn't find it, and almost 4 centuries of neuroscience since then has mostly confirmed he was right not to. So, let's get into why you genuinely cannot prove right now that you're awake. Here's the assumption nobody questions. Waking life and dreams are obviously different. Waking life is stable and continuous, dreams are fragmented and strange, and you can usually tell something's off, even from inside them. That feels true because you're remembering dreams after the fact, once your prefrontal cortex is back online, judging the dream's logic with equipment the dream itself never had access to. But sit with this for a second. While you're inside a dream, it feels exactly as real and exactly as solid as this moment feels to you right now. You don't catch the gaps in dream logic while you're dreaming, only afterward, once a completely different brain state has taken over. So the real question isn't, does this feel real? Of course it does. The question is whether feeling real was ever good evidence to begin with. Descartes sat with that question until it nearly broke him, and what he landed on is one of the more unsettling lines in philosophy. He was by a fire in the winter of 1641, in a rented room, deliberately trying to doubt everything that could be doubted. This wasn't a breakdown, it was a method. He wanted one belief solid enough that nothing could shake it, something to rebuild all knowledge on top of. He started with the senses. Could his eyes deceive him? Obviously yes. Optical illusions alone prove that. So the senses were out. Then he tried something that felt unshakable. I'm sitting here, by this fire, in this room. Surely that much is certain. And then he remembered something that stopped him cold. He'd been fooled by dreams before, plenty of times. Dreams where he was completely convinced he was awake, doing something ordinary with no warning sign, no flicker telling him otherwise. It simply felt like being awake, because that's exactly what it was simulating. He wrote that he was often convinced, while asleep, of ordinary things like sitting by a fire, only to wake and find himself lying undressed in bed. And then came the line that's haunted philosophy ever since. There are no certain marks distinguishing waking from sleep. Not, it's usually obvious. Not, you can mostly tell. None. He looked as hard as anyone ever has and came up empty. No internal signal that reliably separates the two states. Now, lucid dreamers, people trained to recognize when they're dreaming while they're still in it, use specific checks. Look at your hands. In a dream, they sometimes warp, extra fingers, odd texture. Read a line of text twice. It often changes the second time. Flip a light switch. Dream lighting frequently doesn't respond the way it should. These tests genuinely work a lot of the time, so doesn't that solve the problem? It doesn't, and here's why. These checks only work because the dreaming brain occasionally fails to render a detail convincingly. The hand glitches, the text shifts, the switch does nothing. What you're catching isn't dream versus reality, you're catching a rendering error, which means a well-rendered dream, hands look normal, text stays put, lights work fine, sails through every one of these tests. Lucid dream researchers know this. It's why even experienced lucid dreamers will run a reality check, get a clean pass, and still be dreaming.
The test was never proof you're awake. It was only ever a check for a sloppy dream. A good enough dream beats it every time. Here's where neuroscience actually has something concrete to say. During REM sleep, when the most vivid dreaming happens, your brain doesn't just generate random pictures. It lights up large chunks of the visual cortex, the motor cortex, the emotional centers, almost as if you were really living it. What gets dialed down hard is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reality testing and catching logical inconsistencies. So while you're dreaming, the exact piece of your brain whose job is to notice, wait, that doesn't add up, is mostly offline for the night. That's why you can have a full conversation with someone who's been dead for years, feel no surprise at all, walk through a hallway that opens into your old classroom without blinking, and only register how strange it was after waking up, once the prefrontal cortex comes back and judges it retroactively. The dream was never illogical from inside it. It only becomes illogical once a different brain state gets switched on to evaluate it.
For most of the 20th century, mainstream science treated lucid dreaming as basically unprovable. How do you verify what someone's experiencing inside their own head while they're asleep? A researcher named Stephen LaBerge, working at Stanford in the late 70s and early 80s, found a workaround. He trained subjects to recognize when they'd entered a lucid dream and then signal it with a specific eye movement pattern: left, right, left, right. The body is paralyzed during REM sleep, but the eyes aren't. That movement showed up clearly on the polysomnograph recording brain activity. For the first time, there was an external, time-stamped signal proving a specific conscious experience, "I now know I'm dreaming," happened at a verified moment during REM sleep. That was a real breakthrough. But notice what it didn't solve. It gave dreamers no way to verify from inside the dream that the very next moment wasn't also a dream nested inside the one they'd just identified. LaBerge's subjects could prove they were dreaming. Nobody has ever found an equivalent signal that lets someone prove from the inside that they're awake. This next part isn't really about sleep anymore, and it's the part that should bother you a little. Brain imaging studies have repeatedly shown that when you vividly imagine something, the regions that light up are nearly identical to the ones that activate when you actually perceive it. Picture a bright red apple in detail and you get overlapping activity with actually looking at one. Imagine a song clearly enough and you're using much of the same auditory cortex as hearing it. Your brain doesn't run a separate "this is really happening" channel alongside a "this is imagined" one. They share a huge amount of the same wiring. Labeling something as real versus imagined takes extra interpretive work: context, sensory detail, memory. Labeling can fail. It does fail regularly in dreams, in certain drug states, in some psychiatric conditions, and in lab experiments where researchers get subjects to misattribute an imagined sensation to a real touch. So when you tell yourself, "this feels real, therefore it is real," you're trusting a feeling your own brain produces in nearly identical form for things that aren't happening at all. Feeling real was never proof of being real. It's just one more thing the brain generates, and it can generate it under the wrong conditions. You can't point to vividness. Dreams can be more vivid than waking life. You can't point to consistency. A dream can hold together for its entire length the same way your waking life has held together for its entire length so far. You can't point to memory. Dreams build in fabricated memories that feel just as load-bearing as real ones, right up until you wake up and the contradiction becomes visible from outside. Every test you could propose either fails from the inside or just pushes the question back a level. How do you know the test itself isn't also part of the dream? This isn't a riddle with a clever answer waiting at the end. It's a genuinely open problem that the smartest people to ever think about it haven't cracked. Not because they weren't smart enough,
but maybe because the structure of the problem doesn't allow a solution from inside the system being questioned. And right now, you're inside that system. So where does that leave you? Not paralyzed, hopefully. Despite 4 centuries of failing to produce certain proof that any given moment is real rather than dreamed, almost nobody who thinks hard about this ends up unable to function. Descartes got up from that chair and went back to an ordinary life, eating, writing, arguing with colleagues, without ever resolving the question he'd raised. There's something almost freeing in that. If certainty was never on the table, not for you, not for Descartes, not for anyone who's seriously tried, then not having it isn't a personal failure. It's just the actual condition every conscious thing is stuck in. You were never going to find the kind of proof you went looking for. Nobody ever has. What you do have is this. Whether or not this moment is real in some ultimate sense, it's the moment you're having. The people in it still respond to you, still matter to you, still shape what the experience actually feels like. Acting like it counts is, as far as anyone has ever managed to prove, indistinguishable from it actually counting. One last thing. Tonight, when you fall asleep, there's a decent chance you'll dream. And somewhere in that dream, for some stretch of time, you'll be completely convinced, the same way you're convinced right now, that you're awake. No warning sign, no glitch you'll catch in the moment. You'll just be living it, the way you're living this. And if the dream runs long enough, you might find yourself asking the exact question you started this video with. You should probably get used to never fully answering it.